Hey everybody, so I'm here with my good friend Joe. We are actually continuing the series of technology and the arts. And if you don't know Joe, then shame on you. Joe is an awesome, great fusion player, rock player. He's in multiple bands, which are one of my favorite bands of all time, Rush. And the coolest thing about Joe, he's definitely the best teacher I have ever met. I can say that from experience. He was my teacher at once, and hopefully again in the future. So Joe, I will shut up and let you introduce yourself because you do such a better job than I do.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, my name is Joe Pinnavaia, and I've been playing guitar for just about 40 years now. And the bands that I'm in here, that Tim mentioned, I'm in three of them. Well, actually four, if you count my solo project, which I kind of just do recording in my own studio and release that music out into the wild. And I'm in a power trio, known as the Jim Wynn Band, and we do a series of covers, but we basically kind of extend them and fusionize them with all of our own influences, which is always fun and very cathartic. And I play in a cover band called Reset to Vinyl, which covers everything from like 70s up to recent days. So we do everything from like Bruno Mars to Steely Dan to Journey.
Yes.
And then I play in a Rush tribute. The Rush tribute band is called Analog Kids, and we've been together for about 2.5 years, almost 3 years doing that, and that's been a wild ride in learning how to um, basically learn all of Alex Lifeson's, not only guitar solos but all of his rhythm playing because his rhythm chops are pretty intense. So
Yeah.
that's been fun. Plus, learning a little bit about background vocals and trying to play Taurus bass pedals at the same time while trying to play guitar. So it's a whole mind meld when I do that tribute band. So, but it's been a good experience. So, and then I teach on TrueFire as well. So I have my own room there where I've uploaded all my content over the years. So that's there for anyone who wants to pay for like a Starbucks coffee per month. They can have access to that. So, but I think Starbucks is now what, at least $5 a cup now?
Yeah.
Probably,
Yeah.
yes.
So it's cheaper than Starbucks now. So,
Yeah.
well, and those who don't know, TrueFire is a great website, and that's how I found Joe. I did his channel. Definitely check out the channel because it's intense. It's so cool. And the concept is I've been playing for years, poorly, but been playing mainly cover bands in the 80s going into the 90s. And then I wanted to grow my knowledge because there's only so much you can learn in rock, right? And then when I Googled look for fusion instructors, that's when I found Joe. So now with saying that, the concept here is we're talking about how a lot of people in the world don't know how good technology is in the music business, and they also don't know how much technology has, I would almost say, changed music. So our music creativity is still the same, but how we produce it, how we manage it, how we promote it, even how we teach, right? And so all that has changed, especially since the 70s, going into the 80s, going into the 90s, right? Um, Explain, so you've been doing this for 40 years. How did you come out of the 80s, when we had those big studios, big rack mounts, everything was
Yeah.
so heavy, right? You see Eddie Van Halen and they got a stage of amps, right? And now we're down to little bitty boxes, right? And I'm not talking about pedals, but processors, they're digital. Explain the good and bad and the ugly, which is one of my terms, but I like Westerns also, that explain how you grew with that technology. Like, how did it affect your life coming out of the 80s, 90s to today?
Yeah. Yeah, the 80s were it was weird. Well, because I mean, like everybody, a lot of the guys, had Marshall amps and
Yes.
cabs. I was still kind of like, learning back in the 80s. So, because I started playing around, um, like taking lessons when I was like 13. So I really didn't have like a real amp. I had like a Dean Markley solid state amp, and
Right.
I had like a Kramer Flying V, which was like my first
Nice, though.
quote unquote good guitar. Yeah, it was a white flying offset flying B. It was kind of it was something that I always ran into the door frame with and always chipped the paint off. I eventually chipped the paint off at the end of that. but yeah, then I had Arion like stop boxes, like the Arion distortion and the delay, and it
Yeah.
was just not great sounding stuff, right? But I was learning. And then when I got like my first real amp, it was actually a Pierce
Oh,
amplifier, which Pierce interestingly was made right over in the Pierce Aero building here in Buffalo, and made by Dan Pierce. And that was like the first time that like I had an amp that had like digital like reverbs in it.
yeah, yeah.
Kind of pull, do the dial on it. And that was like that had to be probably around, I want to say like 19 coming out of the 80s, like 1990, 91.
Right, right.
I had that amp for a while. And before that, I had a Roland Jazz Chorus,
Hmm.
a 120, which was the real big one, right? So
Yeah,
that I'm
yeah.
trying to schlep this thing around and try to play. I was playing the jazz ensemble at Villa Maria College, and try and get that thing on and off the stage. And it was just I couldn't wait to get rid of it. And this Pierce amplifier was actually rack mountable, so
Right,
all you needed was a cabinet because it was powered already. So you just
right.
plug it into a speaker cabinet and you were good to go. So you know, I kind of went kind of backwards because when I look at what I could have had at a younger age. I could have had a Marshall. I could have already bought a Gibson, but instead I had an Ibanez and I had a Roland Jazz chorus. And then as I readjusted, like the 90s was like the advent of like all things digital.
Right, right.
Everything was digital and that was all the rage. And I didn't get like a real tube amplifier until like the mid 90s. I got a Mason Mark IV, which is actually right behind me over
Oh,
there.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so I still have that one. That one weighs about 40 pounds just as a head
Hmm.
by itself, not including like your pedal board. But I also have, and the other stuff I had from the late 80s, early 90s is I have a Korg A3,
Yeah.
which is one of the first processing units.
Nice.
And they used to give you these cards. They were like these cards that would slide in there that would load different sounds.
Oh, that's cool. I
So I'm
didn't
actually
know.
surprised. I'm looking over there and I see it. It's sitting over there. And on top of that
Oh,
is a Digitech DHP 55. Which was
wow.
like one of the first intelligent harmonizers. I got that in around the mid 90s as well. So I used to use that in my Mesa for a lot of the tones and maybe a
Nice.
couple pedals. Yeah. But I had like, the Boss DD3 delay and then the flange and then, like a
Yeah.
tremolo. And, I wasn't big on distortion stomp boxes back then because I thought they just sounded kind of weak
Muddy.
to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they never had a really great distortion sound, right? So like I had a Mason Mark IV, but it's a 100-watt head and you can never run it that
Oh,
hard.
mess a boogie. You don't need anything. It's
Yeah, I know, right? But here I am, I have, my sister was a vocalist in that first band I was in 92 and we were, called Toxic Love. We do have a CD out there. It's on the Metal Underground in Europe.
nice.
People do buy it, believe it or
I have to
not. And
find that. Yeah.
yeah, I know. It's pretty yeah, it's crazy hair metal, but I had I think I still had the Pierce amplifier back then. I didn't have the Mesa, but when I got the Mesa, she would turn to me on stage and tell me to turn down,
Oh, wow.
and not so nicely either. It would just be like, could you please turn down? I was like, oh, but it's a 100-watt head, and if you don't run them a certain way, they don't sound good.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so
And it's
I'm a
pure
little
tube, right? It's a tube.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if those
So
tubes don't get hot, it doesn't sound right.
well, they have to get to a certain overdrive, there's a
Yeah.
sweet spot on the tube amp. That's why, as technology has changed with, as far as even with tube amps are concerned, even those have gotten smaller, but
Yeah.
they are still packing quite a huge volume punch.
Right, right.
I have a Mesa Recto Verb. It's only a 25-watt amp combo, and I run it on 10 watts, and it's more than enough to play with a drummer.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Just crazy. And yeah, and because it's 10 watts, you can get that sweet spot without killing everybody. So it's great. And then pedals, yeah. Now, we were just talking about this before we hit record, but we were talking about, distortion boxes and, the amp in a box now is like, the technology on that is, now that's what I run. I run primarily a pedal platform and everything is done on a pedal now.
right.
So
Nice. I find it
Yeah.
easier to go directly to the PA versus the wall of amps. Not that I ever had that, but it's easier to control, I guess,
Yeah.
in my opinion. So,
It's easier
um,
for the sound guy. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I mean. Like when you're playing, when I say it's easier to mix when you're live than
Yes. Yeah, there's no mic bleed. It's all isolated and it's usually pre-EQ'd coming out. They have very little work to do with it.
yeah,
And, sound guys love that. I mean, I have a Fractal AX8 that I picked up in 2017.
right,
Um, so it's aging out. It's kind of too big to be, if you put it next to like, some of the Line 6 stuff, the HX Stomp, and
right.
that's laughable because it's so big. But I use it primarily for studio. I've used it for studio stuff. And prior to that, I used, like Logic Pro plugins along with pedals and
Yeah,
impulse responses to get the tones for like, doing recording.
right.
So, yeah.
So that's a good question. Think about even recording today and how it's changed, right?
Yeah.
Um, so talking to somebody the other day and we were joking that back then studio time really sucked because it was a lot of work. You got a
Yep.
short period of time. You refinanced your car just to get 30 minutes of playing. And then you
Yep.
got so much pressure because you've only got like a 30-minute window to revamp that solo that you created. Um, and now you can do everything just sitting in your room. Like you can do a recording with 50 guys and you don't even have to be in the same countries.
Yep.
Um, so explain how that kind of, because I know you do a lot of recordings. One thing I meant to say, so for those who don't know, this is what our fifth time trying this, thanks to technology. My Mac of all things kept crashing. So knock on wood, we survived this one. But one thing you do is you just for kicks and giggles, I love one of the things that turned me on the most about you was your little jamming. It's just a free jam you do over
Mhm.
backtracks. And again, I'm assuming they're backtracks that you
Yep.
have or created. Um, and you used to do them every Friday, and give or take. I know you're busy with like 50 things going on at once, but I used
Yeah.
to love to watch those because I'd watch it and I'd be like, ah, man, that's such. Even if I look and it's like, oh, maybe there's something I can pick up. It's more along the lines of, dude, that sounds awesome. It's just a good
Oh,
playing, good solid. So obviously, you do a lot of recording. That's what I'm digressing to get to.
yeah.
How has that changed versus moving through the decades of music and technology?
Yeah. No, yeah, I remember recording in a studio, especially in the early 90s, it was, you had to rent a studio and you had to show
Yeah,
up and all your gear there. Yeah. Spending more hours getting sounds than anything.
right.
Uh, yeah.
The
So
big
yeah,
analog mixers, which I
yeah,
love
there's
the
like
analog
launch.
sound, but oh,
Yeah, and you
I
always needed an engineer because they were the only ones apparently who understood how to get everything into the board, right? To record. So
exactly.
yeah, and now it's just, um, I started doing the studio thing on my own in like 2004, and I had like a Mac G3 Power PC, which I actually still have. Um, yeah, and I had like an M box with Pro Tools Lite. So
Uh,
it provided enough channels, right? And it provided the DAW that I could like, start putting ideas down. And then, I'm like, well, how do I don't want to mic my amp because I live in an apartment building and I don't want to keep people up and I want to do this when I want to do it.
right.
So I had to like look for like a processor and, the pods were big, but I don't know how much they were, but Behringer had the V-amp,
Yep.
the V-amp 2, which was like which I still have that too. I keep everything. It's like I'm a hoarder. I don't get rid of anything. I have a VM 2 and a VM 3, and that was the first thing that like provided me with like guitar tones that I could just plug in and plug into the audio interface and just play and record without having to mic anything, and it was great. It was liberating because you're like, I can do this myself. I don't need to
Yeah.
pay an engineer. I can do it anytime I want. I have no pressures to like play the perfect solo or get that take just right,
Right.
you know because time is money when you're in the studio.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
It's not cheap.
definitely. Yeah, it adds up fast. So yeah, so that's how I recorded my first solo disc, the In Vitro CD.
Nice.
Yeah, so that one was like, using Reason, which was like drum looping software
Yeah, yeah. I know
that I
reason.
used. Yeah. So, but like because I worked with another another guy here in the city who had his own, he bought a console board.
Oh,
He
wow.
had Pro Tools, like the professional version of it, and like put all this money into it. And he was kind of doing it as like his kind of like his main gig.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So yeah, but I did wind up buying like some mics because I wanted to do some acoustic guitars,
Hmm.
some nylon string stuff. So I did wind up buying like some MXL microphones that, and everything, the prices came down for a lot of the stuff. It was easily accessible.
Yeah.
You can teach yourself how to do it. And like the Pro Tools like manual, I used to have the one here on my desk. It's small. And then when
Yeah.
I moved to Logic Pro, when I got a MacBook and 4 years later,
Yeah.
which of course I still have that, um, the manual on that one was like this thick. So like,
Yeah.
but it was just like for reference only. You weren't going to sit there and
Yeah.
read
Yeah.
all of that because it depends on what you want to do, what you want to use it for. So yeah, then I had to learn how to do busing for effects and all these
Right.
other things. I had to learn how to do that by myself. But and there were videos too on YouTube.
Yep.
YouTube once YouTube got going and everyone was loading up videos of tutorials on how to record. So there's plenty of resources out there now that we didn't have back then
Oh, I know.
for everything. So including all the audio engineering, recording, mixing,
Yeah.
uh, which is only something I got into recently for just my own stuff, doing the videos that we put out for both Analog Kids and for Reset. I usually mix the audio on that.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah,
So
but
it's kind of a good point. So another question I like to ask is when you think about modern kids today, and I use that term loosely, modern musicians today, and I'm assuming you grew up kind of the way I did because there wasn't a lot of technology back then. When we learned something, it usually was by listening, right? And
mhm,
good or bad, I remember my first song that I was excited about was Ain't Talking About Love by Van Halen because I got the little magazine, guitar player magazine, right? That's set down.
yeah,
But I didn't know they were a half step down, right? So because
yeah,
I didn't know how to read that well. Um, so, but then you spawn things out of it. So the one thing that you see a lot of videos out there with kids who are just amazing on guitar, but I feel like it's just a repetition pattern, right? So it's like I feel like a lot of the kids today are missing out the most simple thing because of technology is they're not really learning to listen. So they'll learn to mimic, but not
mhm,
really listen, right?
yeah,
And that kills their improvisation, right? So whenever they're playing around, like you see these young kids just wailing away on Eruption by Van Halen. I'm like, that's great, but what else can you do? Right?
mhm,
Or, just stuff like that. So that's kind of how I feel. I was talking to my kids because I try to get them into music. The biggest secret to music is just learn to listen. And then digress one more time, and then I'll ask the question.
yeah,
Um, for an example, David Gilmour actually made the comment, you know me, my idols, Van Halen, Pink
mhm,
Floyd, and then he goes to Alan Holdsworth. And so I have a very good mixture of stuff I like. Um, but David Gilmour said that the day of putting a record on and listen to beginning to end is over, right? People now buy either the song or something like that. But even Pink Floyd, when they released that album they did for the piano player that died, right? Um, he said the concept is you put it on and every song bleeds into each other. So there's no pauses in between the songs, kind of like Dark Side
yeah,
of the Moon. Um, but I feel like kids today have forgot to listen. They just find it on YouTube, they download the tab, they mimic it, and then they just post it on YouTube.
mhm,
So I feel like they're doing it for a trend, but not really learning to listen. And I think technology hurts them in that way. Does that make sense?
yeah. Well, yeah, it does. Yeah,
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 because there's some great guitar players out there, but again, they sound great in their bedroom or in their little studio. But if you put them on stage, I don't know how they would sound.
yeah. Well,
Does
I
that
mean,
make sense?
a lot of them would be playing exactly what they played in their room
Yeah,
on stage
yeah,
because
exactly.
everything is so well rehearsed, right? I mean, this is like a point that like Frank Zappa made, and I saw in an interview, and it always stuck with me. Is that you know there's an element of improvisation that's like always risky.
Yeah.
And I do it all the time. Like if I try to go over something and it's not quite right there, Because you're doing it in the moment. You're doing instant recall of your techniques, what you know,
Yep.
and assessing in the moment what's right, and you're trying to create as you go along. It's good. That's where the improvisational or the jazz approach is, right? It's
Right.
always like, you know, me against the laws of nature,
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily always know when there's a moment for me to improvise, even if it's in with like there's little moments inside like doing like the Rush tribute or with some of the covers where there's moments where they allow me to do solo, or there's a solo that Alex will, you know, be improving on
Yeah. Yeah.
certain parts because he never plays it the same. Like, if it's a iconic solo, he's playing the solo.
Right. Right. You have to do that solo. Yep.
But there's other moments, there's outros, there's moments where you can kind of improvise, and those are the moments where, I try to put myself in there,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
this is me, this is not, Alex or Neil Sean or, and this is me
Right.
doing this. So, but that is always risky. There's players out there that can improvise, but for some reason they don't necessarily move you. And this is the downfall of learning covers all the time, mimicking everything is that
Yeah.
that side of your brain kind of takes a break
Right. Right.
because you're relying on the internalized, memorized muscle memory of learning those guitar solos. So
Which is funny because
that's
that's why I came to you, is I wanted to learn to solo like me and not like Eric Clapton or Gilmore.
and that's why those Friday jam videos I used to do were kind of like for me, those that kind of stemmed from me trying to learn how to be a better improviser.
Right.
And I have to get back to that again because I've taken a break from doing a lot of those, but I need to get back to that again. And actually, I've tried doing some videos, and I just feel like nothing has been that great that I should probably put it out.
Right.
Um,
That's me every time.
yeah, well, there's some times where I was like, yeah, I kind of screwed that up, but you know what, the rest of it's great, so I'm just gonna let it fly
Yeah.
because this is live and in the moment, and if you're gonna rehearse a solo over and over and over again, like a lot of bedroom players do, that stuff is completely rehearsed.
Yeah.
Even the stuff where it looks like they're improvising, they're not really improvising. Like, and we can talk about, the recording process too, because some guys will write and compose solos, right? You
Yep.
know, like, Tosin Abasi, he's an example of a guy who can play, right?
Yeah.
Great
Yeah.
player. But for a long time, he would, script out solos and he wouldn't deviate from those.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
even if being as skilled as he is, and
Yeah.
there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with you're composing a solo, but you're like, to get to that point, you have to improvise it or have an idea, and then you got to refine it, and then so it's still a lot of work to do. That's why seeing guys like Steve Vai or Joe Satriani, they're great, but sometimes I'd like to just see them
Yeah. Yeah.
just go off and do something other than what's on the album.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it was one of the reasons good or bad and ugly, it's one of the reasons I liked David Gilmour. Was if you'd listen, even on like the Pulse album and things like that, the live, like you were saying, he played the beginning of the solo, and it's the solo, but then there's like four or five extra measures after the
Mhm.
solo where he's just freeforming.
Yeah.
And that's what I like because you get into the groove and kind of enjoy it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so question for you. Whenever you're playing live, do you use, and I know, I think I've said this before in one of our bad takes uh, before the Mac crashed. So one thing that turned me on to this, and to let you know, I think I told you where it was going, but there's a lot of people who don't realize that technology does do a lot, especially when you're playing live and when you're in your studio. And when you're playing live, a lot of people use wireless. A lot of people like these um, bands in the boxes, or what are you going to call them? Like I have the GT 1000, the Helix. A lot of them have Bluetooth, and a lot of them have Wi-Fi now. And I think that's where a lot of people are trying to go. When my boss and I went and saw John Mayer, I pointed to him that the mixing board is in the middle of the audience, and there's no cables. You can't have cables running because you ain't got a
Hmm.
trip hazard, right? A lot of modern mixers are actually Wi-Fi for that reason. But that means inside the stadium, there has to be enough Wi-Fi. Now, I would never be at a John Mayer level, but the question is, do you trust any Wi-Fi or if you would, what would you do differently on stage? Like, would you go completely wireless, or would you,
Mm.
if you, let's say you played at a big venue and they said, hey, the Wi-Fi here is just massively awesome. You would never have to touch it, never have to worry about it. Would you go completely wireless? Would you still trust it? Because in music, you got to have your timing right. Everything's got to be
Yeah.
on point,
Mhm.
right? So, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. If it's a wireless system that you're interfacing with, I don't know. Like you always need to have a plan for your plan.
Yeah,
You need to have a backup plan. So, I mean, it's easy to probably just, you know, re, you know, um, rewire it if you had to, if a disaster occurred, because if it's Wi-Fi and it would be affecting everybody,
right.
uh, at that point. But something like that, if they're going to offer it, usually it's like a tested thing. Like, don't be the first band to try it out.
Right, right.
Make sure there's like several other bands that have done it and said, "Oh yeah, everything's great," and then
Yeah,
then it's tested, and this way that it's solid. But yeah, the whole wireless thing always makes me a little nervous because I'm always, I get, because again, I'm old school, so
yep,
I don't even use a wireless controller wireless on stage for my guitar,
yeah.
mainly because I'm always switching them and that's confusing. And I just prefer to have a line switcher and then just have everything wired
That's
and
what,
pick one
yeah,
up and put one down. Um,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
but yeah, those guys who do the mixing on the iPad, they walk around the stage, are like, "Oh, what do you need in your monitor?" And they're just like doing this, and you're like, "Oh, you can do it," and they're like, "Yeah, I do it right from here," and I'm like, "Oh, pretty
Oh, yeah.
cool." Yeah, so the audio engineers love it, and yeah, I know that's where everything's kind of going. There's a lot of local bands that are actually doing that too to make it really easy for them to manage their own sound.
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense. Yeah.
yep.
I didn't think about the lower level. Yeah, that would be my level, right? So, um, so, um, yeah, because another thing too is when you think about the Wi-Fi and the wireless, it's good for the some guys to be able to walk around the arena and listen to everybody versus being stationary right there at that one spot. I remember in the older days, we had a guy walking around yelling, "Hey, turn it down!" And he'd be over in the
Yeah.
corner, and the guy would hear on this. I'd be like, "Well, I can't hear it." And you got the guy in the middle trying to, get it right.
Yep.
So, uh, so yeah, I didn't think about that level. The other thing too is whenever you're playing, like you said, you switch things out, which is good. I'm more of an old school guy too. I would never trust anything but cables just because I trust it. Um, but you have that whole other side of the world where you're also getting your name out there, right? So you got
Mhm.
people recording you, sending you on Facebook. It's same with this, right? So we're going to promote this. It's going to be on a couple of websites. Um, so how has that changed? Like in the older days, you had to have a music producer, you had to have a manager, a record producer, a record contract, all this stuff. And now these days, you can just make money on YouTube, just putting your music out there if you do it right. Um,
Yeah.
Very rarely does somebody get picked up, but every now and they did. Like the lead singer of Journey, right? They found him on YouTube, if I understood the story correctly, right?
Yeah.
So, how did that get, especially teaching, right? Because I live in
Mhm.
Nashville, you live in Buffalo, New York.
Yeah.
You're a long drive for once a week lesson.
Yeah.
How did this part of technology change in your career?
Yeah. So, the accessibility factor, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's more accessible. Like even some of the bigger names, if I want to take a lesson with Greg Howe, I just go to his website and sign up now.
Yeah.
And then
That's
I'm
awesome.
I'm on here and I'm like, "Hey Greg, how's it going?" He's like, "Hey man," and he's just
Noodling
doing this the
away.
entire time, and you're talking, and you're trying to hopefully get something out of that.
Right.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I
I
love
studied.
Greg Howe. Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I had one lesson with him. I'll never forget it. It was cool though. And then I had
Yeah.
several lessons with Dave Martone, and then
Oh, wow.
Graham Young in the UK. Like, yeah, I studied with a guy in the UK. So I mean, yeah. So
Nice.
it just social media, the internet, all that stuff has really kind of made the world a lot smaller in that regard. And that's an enjoyable aspect because again, people are more accessible. The only thing about like, now if you're out playing the gig, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Everyone's got their phones out, everyone's recording.
Yep.
So even if you don't want that performance to be recorded, you can rest assured there's somebody in the
Still out
room
there. Yep.
that's either going live with it or is going to post it later. For good or for bad, because I've had some bad
Exactly.
stuff posted too. So, because just like I said, live to sometimes, there's good moments where you're like, oh, that was great. I hope somebody recorded it.
Right,
And then
right.
you have moments where you're like, I hope nobody recorded it.
And then
You
that's the
know?
first video you see when you get home. Like, oh
Yeah, I
no.
know. It's like, oh, you're tagged. Oh, I'm like, can I remove that tag?
That's funny. Well, it,
Yeah.
it, it is funny because obviously you're, no offense, I like you, but you're a very expensive ticket to come see you live. So I try to watch all the stuff I see you posted. And like I
Mhm.
said, I'm really impressed. I mean, you guys go from Van Halen to Journey to, it's a lot, and it's
Yeah,
amazing. So
it's a lot. Yep.
yeah, and people don't realize that there's a lot of work put in learning things. Like you said, if it's Van Halen, you got to have that solo to the point, or they're going to kick you off the stage, right?
Yeah, they're gonna be like, what was that? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that wasn't
Yeah.
Eddie. Get out of here,
Mhm.
amateur, right? So,
Yep. Yep.
but then same with Journey. People don't realize, like, to me, Journey has some. I can't. What was the guy's name in Journey? But he was a great solo writer.
Yeah.
It wasn't fast, but it was very melodical. It was very beautiful sounding for that style. I mean, it was
Yeah.
mixed in like Steve Perry. He's got an awesome voice. So to try to write a
Mhm.
solo around his voice, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know about that. I
Yeah.
think I think I saw you
Yeah.
guys do Faithfully or something.
Yeah. We actually do a whole like tribute set to Journeys, like 17 Journey songs. So
Yeah,
yeah, so there's some that don't have like not like a Neil Sean solo in it, but
yeah, yeah,
yeah, but majority of them do, and they're always singable.
yeah,
You know what I mean? So
yeah, yeah,
you have to play it because I never used to do that back in the earlier days of my playing.
yeah.
I was too good to do that apparently. I'm like,
Right,
oh, I just want to put my own solo in there.
right,
But I
right.
found out that nobody cares about your solo.
Exactly.
Then when they're here, when they're listening to a cover band, they're like, yeah, you guys are great, but you should really learn the solos. I used to get that all the time, and I'd be like, well, well, apparently they don't recognize my genius, apparently. And it took me a while to be like, okay, when I joined Reset, and I joined Reset to Vinyl, I said, okay, I'm going to challenge myself now to learn all the solos for every single tune that we do.
Right.
And then the compliments went from, from that you know, thank you for playing the solos because you really, you're paying tribute to these artists and really
Right.
that's a lot of work and I really respect that. And I was like,
Exactly.
wow, okay, it makes a difference. And
Yeah.
then you have moments where you go off and then people know that, but and they don't care because you're doing the solo in the song and then you have your moment to do your own thing. And I
Right.
think that's a great kind of way to treat it. So
Yeah. I think that's really cool. So,
yeah.
so a couple more questions, I guess.
Yeah.
If you could have a dream setup with technology, because we got to think
Mhm.
about technology here,
Yeah.
um, where would you put that time and effort? Would it be live? Would it be recording? Would it be just in your instruments alone? Like John Petrucci, he is what he is. He's a genius. He's fast. I saw a sound. I went to a sound seminar with him many decades ago, and ironically, it was for Massa Boogie. One of the main creators for Massa Boogie was there. But I asked John Petrucci the same question. If I'm not loaded, so but if you have 3,000, because that's about how much his guitar cost, right? The JP15, um,
Yeah.
would you put your money in the amp or would you put it in the guitar? And his comment was the guitar. Now
Mhm.
it's I think he's being biased because it's his guitar, right?
Yeah.
But kind of reverse that question. If you had the dream setup, some techie company called you up and said, "Hey Joe, we're going to invest in you, but we only invest in one area. Technology wise, where would
Mhm.
that be? Because I still like analog when it comes to music. A lot of my pedals analog. I still like analog. But
Yeah.
if you could go technically, where would you put that money?
Um, I don't know. There's so many guitars out there already
Yeah.
that, so it wouldn't be in an instrument. Um, I think amplifiers are, also in the same ballpark as guitars. There's tons of amps out there.
Yeah.
And recording, I don't really see the need for that. I mean, my dream rig really would be for live. It would be for doing something that's easily portable,
Okay.
is able to be, maybe tweaked on the fly or at least honed in enough where you don't have to do that. That I could split the sound to go front of house and to a reference amp behind me, or even a clean amp, right, for stage.
Right. Nice.
And yeah, it would cover all my bases and it would be extremely portable. Because that's always, you know what I mean? It's extremely
Yeah.
portable. Yeah,
Absolutely.
like that's where my money would go right now because I always struggle with trying to come up with a live rig that is, you know, simple enough, but yet has everything that I want,
Right.
which is not easy to do because, you know, we're guitar players, so we want everything.
Exactly. The best
We want
part.
all the
Best
pedals and we want
yeah,
all the
yeah.
knobs and we want all the lights on the amp and everything because that's, you know, the
Even
more
if we don't
that,
need it, we still want it.
yeah, yeah, the more lights you have on your amp, the better you are. Did you know that?
Exactly.
Yeah, it would have to be like that and something that can be blended together. And, you know, I would, yeah, just, you know, front of house and then an amp and I would mic them, or I'd have the mic'd amp and that mixed together to create a big tone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be something that I like to do. That's why those impulse response pedals are interesting to me because you can kind of almost get there without reinventing the wheel. So,
So it's funny because I'm kind of I guess I'm going to blame it on age, but I grew up with the Les Paul and the Marshall, right? So I grew up really playing guitar in the 80s. That's when I was heads down, just learning everything I could. And back then, if you weren't a Led Zeppelin fan or, you know, if you didn't have that monster screaming amp, especially when the hair bands came out, then you weren't a guitar player, right?
mhm.
But now I'm like, I don't even own an amp anymore. So I don't want that. I did have the Marshall full stack one time just to say I had it, but I probably had it for like a year and then sold it because you can't turn it up. Right. Even
Okay.
on the stage, you couldn't turn it up. So
Yep.
I actually sold it and bought a classical guitar for it. But with saying that, I'm kind of the same way. I love the IRs. I love the pedals, the concept. The the one thing I don't like, is when I was on stage back in the day playing the 80s, using a little flashlight, trying to turn all the knobs. So I like how everything's digitally now, like you were saying. I
Yep.
can get to things easier. Like for an example, the Boss, you can create playlists. So I really can set each song on each playlist like you would on stage. So, okay, now we're going to go from Journey, click a button, now playing Van Halen. And with the
Mhm.
IRs, the audience didn't know the difference, right?
Yeah.
So if you got a good IR, um, so yeah, I kind of feel you on that situation. I
Mhm.
think the smaller the better. I was trying to think of the girl's name. She played with Alice Cooper. She's out on Stress, Stress, whatever. But she promotes the Boss GT, and she said that she toured for a complete year with only that.
Mhm.
And that made me think about it. Same thing you said, because back in the days, what I was explaining to my wife is being a guitar player, especially when you're broke and you're not good, isn't what people think. You show up an hour or two before the club opens to set up. You've got half the stuff in whatever beat up car you got because you spent all your money on your amps, right?
Yep.
And then you set up, and then when the concert's done, you break it down, and that's another 2 hours. And then you're so tired, you just drive to the next venue, right? But like you were saying, now you can just put it all in a box and drop it, and you don't
Yep.
have to do all that.
Take a
So
cable and just roll it out and set it up and yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'll never forget. God, now I'm really digressing, but one of my favorite setups was we were actually in a kind of like a barn studio, and it was a half baked recording studio. But we picked it because we were broke. We were kids. I had a Les Paul and got woke up in the middle of the night because everything overheated and the building caught on fire. So
Oh,
we
wow.
lost all of our equipment. It's like, oh man. So we
Yeah.
lost everything, the amps, the pedals, and the funny thing, and of course the drums, the keyboards, whatever we had. And I think I was like 18 at the time, so I didn't have a lot of money. Um, so the funny thing is we went out to now if you look at it, if yeah, cry over the guitars. But now if something happens, it's just the one little box, the so that's kind of cool. Uh,
Yeah.
cool in a bad way, it's still kind of cool. Um, so but now I guess that's one question too. Would you, if you were playing, and the worst thing about pedals, I love pedals. Gosh, I think this year alone, I've given away over 100 pedals, just swapping and trading and borrowing and that kind of, what guitar players do.
Yeah.
Um, they sound great in your little studio, But on stage, my biggest fear was always tweaking the pedals,
Yeah.
right? So, because this song needs more muff, this song needs more distortion, this song needs more delay. And,
Yeah.
the tap tempo's handy as long as everybody else is in tune, right? So,
Mhm.
how did you manage? Would you trust an iPad, I guess, to manage your sound? Or do you still like to monk on the stage with a flashlight, right?
Yeah. No.
I guess it's like, how would you do it now versus how would the dream be?
How do I, doing it now, how would I do it now?
Yeah, well, because I imagine Rush,
Mhm.
you're probably using, like you said, you're doing, for those who don't know, explain what the pedal, I know what it is, but explain what the tap dancing piano is. Um,
Oh, yes, it is yeah, it is. Well, I have it basically mimics the old Taurus pedals. You know what I mean? It
right.
looks like the big, long piano keys,
Mhm.
whatever. You step on with your feet. And mine's just a MIDI controller, and I control patches that Nat, our keyboard based vocalist, because we're a
Right.
three-piece. So I control some triggers and I control some other bass notes and whatnot.
Nice.
Um, yeah, so it's like a trigger, and it also does, basically like a C to C octave piano. It's exactly what it looks like, but it's on the floor.
Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah,
So you're really like one of those band guys you see on the street. You just need like a snare drum on your back
yeah,
and
maybe. Yeah, I
yeah,
don't
play
know.
the guitar, play the drum and the piano at the same time.
Yep, just turn your brain off and play. Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
one thing about Rush is people don't realize, even though it's a three piece, that they were great musicians. Well, I mean, they still are, minus Neil Peart, but
yeah,
they're to make those sounds they did. It's not just a couple kids in the garage anymore. It's there's a
no,
lot more to it.
yeah, yeah,
So, so I guess if you have to tweak a very popular guitar term, when you've got to tweak your sound on stage,
yes,
how do you do that and still stay within the realm of what you're doing? Like they can't stop the song because you hit the wrong delay pedal, right? So
yeah.
how would you tweak your stuff on stage now?
Yeah, so it's about pre-planning ahead of time for what you need for
Mm,
various songs, right? So
right,
there's certain things that you need. Even if it's one pedal, that pedal sits there on the board until you need it.
right,
And, if I'm going to tweak anything, it's, just, they're all analog pedals, so they all have their knobs there. So if I have to tweak anything, if my delay's too long, I got to turn it down.
right.
Um, if it needs more, I got to turn it up, so. That, I mean, it's just probably the simple, most direct way of doing it. And if there was a way to, like, if I had like an amp modeler and I had a controller that I could just do this with, it would be the same type of thing.
Yeah,
Like we need more of this, less of that type of thing. Just that it would be like a Bluetooth connected controller or something
exactly.
different. Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
gonna bring in the next question. So for newbies playing live, what would you recommend? Because I mean, yours comes with experience, right? So
Mhm.
you grew up and when you tweak this little knob, it does this. When you tweak that little knob, it does that. But somebody playing live as a young kid, say my kid's like 18, if he was to play live, he didn't have that experience. And when you're playing
Yeah.
live and if you tweak the wrong thing, you just totally blew the song. He gets feedback or or something massive.
Yeah.
That'd be the worst case, right?
Mm.
Um, like there's some things on a delay pedal that just sounds like whoa, right, really horrible
Yeah.
if you turn the wrong
Yeah.
knob. So
Yep.
I think modulation on delay pedals should be separate, not that's my personal opinion, but still.
Yeah.
Um, so um, but with saying that, would you recommend a beginner to go down the technology path and say, get you an iPad that you can tweak because you got a better standing versus being on stage with a flashlight, right? I haven't been
Mhm.
on stage in forever, but
Yeah.
back in those days, you had a little pocket flashlight to try to figure out what your settings were.
Yeah.
Um, what would you recommend for a beginner to try to go about? In other words, the technology route of, because let's be honest, the pad in this, it's really more technology based versus
Mhm.
hearing and just experimenting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So, well, it depends on what they're trying to do,
yeah,
right? So the main thing is not to overwhelm yourself with too many options,
right.
So but newer players, younger players today have a better understanding of some of that technology out of the box already because they're growing up in a different time where these things are
Yeah.
this is what it is. So some of them may understand the workflows a little bit differently so that they're able to manage that better. So it's either if you're going to go that route of it's going to be like an all-in-one processing unit on the floor, you better make sure you have your sounds
Right.
figured out,
Yep.
or at least figure out a way that you can get in there and change it if you need to do it on the fly, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, every venue you go to is going to be different. So you may have to shave a little EQ off here and there, depending on what room you're in
Yeah. I was
or
gonna say
what
a
stage.
reverb. Reverb's a big
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
yeah, because you might be in a large room that you don't need a lot of reverb, and your sound getting washed out, or you got too much low end in your sound, and you're on a stage that's really boomy
Yeah.
that just kind of traps low end frequency, and So I guess don't overwhelm yourself with options. Know what you want ahead of time. Test it as much as possible. And if you don't want to go that digital route, then just go analog route, and you can find like pedal units that have they have delay, reverb, distortion in them, or they're like two in one.
Right. Right.
Those are always nice pedals to have, right? Because I think Keeley makes a few of those. I was
Oh,
looking at the Keeley Caverns, and then there's the DDR
yeah.
with like the digital delay, reverb, and distortion.
Yeah. Yeah. They make the Indie Timid series, which is a pretty good set too.
Yeah, yeah. So sometimes those options are cool because you get more in one and it's smaller footprint, and you can kind of tweak it if you had to.
Right.
Yeah, that would be kind of the route I would go. Actually, that's what I'm looking to do for my new board when I'm making my new board. Because
So I
one
just
board is not enough.
exactly. Just to give people an example, this is just a pedal. This is an old school. This is the Nova Delay. But what we're talking about is, if you notice, there's a lot of little configurations on this thing. The good thing about this one, though, is you can actually program presets. So I can bounce the presets if I want to, which is the settings. So that way you and I know what we're talking about, but people watching this may have no idea what we're talking
Yeah.
about. So,
Yep.
um, so it's actually a good point. All right. So to keep you and I could talk for days, but to keep this
Yeah.
video for being like 20 hours long,
Yep.
I always like to say, is there anything I should have asked that I didn't ask? Like, is there anything you can now think about technology and music? Is there anything that comes to your mind that would be a good topic or, you know,
Um, I think you touched on a lot. Recording, the accessibility factor. I mean, the way the gears changed over the years. Um, no, I don't think there's anything additional. I mean, like you said, we could always find more topics to talk about, but
right,
I think it covered most of it. I mean, like the sound engineering side of it, I'm not super familiar with the live configurations that they got going on. I've seen a few,
right,
uh,
right.
and that's more of like the sound engineer can probably give you a whole workflow of how things have changed in their realm over the years. Um, and that's another perspective that's always worth looking into too.
That's a good point
Because
because I think they would have more changes. Like as musicians, our life has changed, but not dramatically changed. I think theirs has truly dramatically changed.
yeah, I mean, some sound guys will travel with their soundboard and they just plug into the system that they're in,
Yeah,
which I kind of understand that. I mean, and some of them I guess are now using Ethernet cabling for running however they're patching their boards in,
right. Yeah, good point.
using Cat 5 cable now, which is, I never heard of that. I was like,
Yeah,
why?
exactly.
I'm like, what is this like it looks like a network closet. What do you
Yeah.
doing? Like, no, it's my sound rig. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I don't know anything about that, but that looks
Yeah,
really
yeah.
cool.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
So it's funny because that's actually what brought up the conversation with my boss and I is when we went and saw John Mayer. And it was only this last concert we went together. And he's a big Grateful Dead guy. I'm more of a rocker type guy. So unless I love fusion. I think fusion is the adult version of rock. But on both sides of the stage is Christmas lights like crazy. Right? So I
Yeah.
pointed that out and say, you see all that? All those are doing stuff. I have no idea what they're doing, but they're doing stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so kind of like you're talking about the sound guy, I'm pretty sure he has all kind of little cute little gadgets to help him out. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't think about that. So I'm pretty sure their world has dramatically changed, especially to me. I still like the average person may not know, and maybe you can interrupt me on this one or school me on this one. To me, I'm still more of an analog guy. I still like the analog sound. I remember when the Line 6 first came out, I hated it because I'm like, yeah, that's not a Marshall. That's not a Les Paul. That's a very bad version of a, if you don't hear that hum from that amp tube,
Yeah.
then you're not good. But now everything is so, you know, it's got so much better that you probably can't tell the difference between analog and digital. Um, if you have the right device, like a fractal,
Yeah.
for an example, right? That is a great, what's the other one? Not the fractal, but there's another one that's the Kemper, right? Those are,
Temper, yeah, the quad cortex, which,
yeah,
yeah,
the things
yeah,
that
those
are
are.
beyond
Mhm.
my budget, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting because you're familiar with Pliny, right? The guitar player Pliny. You know
Yeah,
who he is?
yeah, 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 for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So he said in an interview he's never even played through an amp before.
Wow. That's crazy.
It's always been through some sort of modeling
Yeah.
software, quad cortex, and if you ever watch those guys play live, there's never a pedal board on the floor
Yeah. That's cool. I
because
never even
everything
thought
is
about that.
done through tracks, laptop, and
Yeah.
then they have MIDI switching behind the scene just to switch his sounds.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
that's how far like the technology can take you. You can take what you took and what you did in the studio, you can take that on the road
Yeah.
and play the same thing.
So that was one of
Sounds.
my fears. So I use the IK multimedia
Mhm.
and I bring it into Logic Pro. And again, I'm nowhere near a level, right? I just like to monkey around. And but then I started thinking you have all these like 500 pedals you can choose from. So as a bad habit, I always pick pedals I already own. So like I'll play an ODC pedal because then I'm thinking, well, if somebody tells me to play this live, I want to make sure I can mimic it. But the funny
Yeah.
thing is now the IK media actually has a pedal. It has a pedal for each one. So you can just download whatever you set up onto the pedal, and then you can just play it on stage.
Yep.
Which to me, it's really, I don't know if I like that, but it's a cool, like for those guys, it's pretty cool. Um,
Yeah.
so, but yeah, I thought I was 350 is the pedal, $350. But whatever you set up for IRs, and not just IRs, but whatever you set up in that, like for those who know what IRs are, right? It's you can set up how your amps and your speakers and your cabinets and your mics, and you can set all that up, and it's called an IR. Um, some response. What's the I stand for?
It's impulse response,
Yeah,
I believe.
impulse response.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
for
because the
yeah.
boss has the AIRD, which is not IR, but it's pretty close to it.
Mhm.
Um, But the point that I was getting at was I was always afraid to do what I did in the IK multimedia on my screen because then if I ever played it live or if somebody came over and said, hey, let's jam, I wouldn't be able to mimic that sound. So I always picked
Mhm.
pedals that I knew. That way I can kind of get close to it. But like I said, now for $300, you can take exactly what you did in your studio onto a pedal, onto stage. And then to your point, not even need an amp, take it directly to the PA and
Mhm.
there you go.
Yep.
So it's
Yep.
just pretty amazing. I
It
mean,
is.
yeah. I was gonna say pretty soon when my kids get my age, they won't even need a guitar anymore. They'll just do this and yeah.
They'll just like put like electrodes to their head and they'll just like
Yeah,
go like
exactly.
just think about it and it'll just come out of like a speaker somewhere.
Exactly. So, well,
Yeah.
cool, man. Well, I won't keep you too much longer. I'll actually stop the video and we can chat.
Okay.
But like I said, for YouTube, and so we'll promote this. We have, like I told you before, we'll put this out there and make sure people know how to find you.
Yeah.
And know how to watch this video. And like I said, the biggest thing is, it's just to let people know that the old school music, which I loved, unfortunately, Fleetwood Macs and the early people, it's not just pulling an acoustic guitar in your room anymore and taking it to a studio to do a 4-day recording down in, oh my gosh, what's the Beatles' famous
Abbey
studio?
Road.
Yeah,
Abbey
down the
Road.
Abbey Road, and
Mhm.
can't believe I had a brain fart there. But and then it's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
Technology has completely changed how we even approach music. My kids are so used to it, I can't even get them to practice. So they're like, "Well, here, I'll just air and play on Logic Pro," and they start making all kind of cool noise. And I'm like, "How'd you do that? That was pretty
Yeah.
cool."
Yeah.
So. But anyway, so thanks, man. I do appreciate the time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I do think for at least tolerating me for 5 tries, maybe.
Ah,
Uh,
I'm actually surprised the Windows computer outdid the Mac.
oh, I know. It's amazing, which I don't
I
know what's
know
going on with Mac, but still, hey, who knows?
that shouldn't happen. In my experience, it should not happen.
I know. I should get some kind of promotion for that one.
Yeah, I know, right. I know, for real.
Cool, man. I'm going to stop recording.
Sure.